Okay, I'm going to turn off my video just because I don't have a lot of bandwidth and your voice is cracking up. You did get the slides that I sent this morning? Okay, yeah. So what I'd like to do is, because time is limited, I just wanted to say that I'm very heartened by the efforts that you are all making to keep the Indian Point power plant going. I'm all in favor of that. But I want to step back a little bit and tell you where I'm coming from as a climate scientist and look at this just for a minute as a global problem. So it's absolutely clear that if we're going to avoid some very serious risks for the climate, we have to decarbonize the global economy pretty quickly, okay? There are various estimates of how quickly, but I think we've waited so long now, it's going to have to be very quickly. I'm an energy agnostic in the sense that I don't really care how it's done as long as it's done, as long as we get rid of the carbon emissions or maybe learn how to take greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. We can do that. I'm not so opposed to natural gas. Right now, it's much too expensive to do that. So I just wanted to spend my few minutes reviewing with you what I think it's going to take. And I'm going to focus on doing it with nuclear power for a very good reason. It's the only power source which historically we've been able to ramp up fast enough to do this. Way faster than we've been able to ramp up renewables. And so I'm just an empiricist. What can you do? Sweden and France are two countries, and there are a handful of others, that have ramped up energy fast enough to do this. And I'll sort of show you the numbers here. So let's look first of all what we need. So the projected global electrical power consumption in the year 2040, which I'm going to use as a target year here, is 7 trillion watts globally. This includes the growth of power consumption in certain developing countries like India, and it also includes a big factor for electrifying vehicles. So it's a fairly liberal number right now that we're doing about 2 trillion watts of power consumption. Now, that's equivalent to powering the world with 1,800 4-gigawatt nuclear reactors, fairly large reactors. The largest reactor in Sweden right now is 4 gigawatts. So if we wanted to do this by 2040, it's a simple math. We need to build about 90 reactors per year globally, okay? The cost to build one such reactor in South Korea today is about $8 billion in today's dollars. Right? So we need to spend about $700 billion a year. And it sounds like a lot. It amounts to 3.5% of global or world domestic product. It's a hefty number. It's not outrageous. And it should be compared to numbers or prices it would cost to decarbonize the economy by other means, such as renewables. But this is just looking at nuclear. Now, we know that been done in some smaller scale. In the 1970s and 1980s, I'm going to use Sweden as an example, one 4-gigawatt reactor per 10 million residents per year. Now, if you scale that up to the world population, that would amount to 750 reactors per year, which is a whole lot more than we actually need. So in other words, if the world engaged in a program to build nuclear reactors at the pace, in a normalized sense of what Sweden did in the 70s, 80s, we could do this very easily. So if I could have the next slide, Eric.
Nope.
I don't know what happened to the next one, but
there we go. I think, yeah, it's, yep, it's, you just have to click the arrow inside of that particular frame, Rezwan.
Okay. You do or I do?
No, she does. It just says 1 of 2. Oh, there you go. There you go. Okay.
Great. So I want to talk about not just the cost, but the non-climate savings. That is the benefits of doing this aside from the big ticket item, which is climate. So the World Health Organization estimates that there are about 4 million premature deaths annually from particulate pollution, mostly from fossil fuel. Now, one can argue about this, but economists use the economic value of life globally average is $100,000. Okay. So if we save that number of lives by the year 2040, we're saving about $400 billion per year. And so that sort of brings the net cost of doing it down to about 300 billion a year, or 1.5% of today's world domestic product. But of course, the benefits go beyond that, because cheap green energy would permit large increases in per capita wealth in the developing world. So you can be increasing the world domestic product and helping to eliminate poverty. So there are a lot of benefits to cheap green energy aside from climate. So I would argue that this energy conversion would likely yield a net benefit even before you consider climate change. And the climate cost of continued dependence on fossil fuels could be very, very large compared to these numbers. So I just want to give you all the sense that if we had the will to do this, if we could convince our environmentalist friends that if they're really serious about tackling climate change by getting rid of greenhouse gas emissions, we know we can do this. There are a lot of problems to be solved, and I want to just mention one other thing. If we really ramped up nuclear power, we would also be ramping up nuclear innovation. We can build plants which are much safer and much more efficient than the ones that are operating today. So that's where I wanted to, that's the kind of message I wanted to make. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll want to push back on one thing you said. So you said plants that are much safer than today's. How can you get safer than the safest form of electricity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point, Eric. And of course, this is something I make when I talk to all kinds of groups. It is the safest, in a normalized sense, the safest power source we have. Mm-hmm. So, even safer is simply a statement that we can make the plants passively safe and so forth. But the main thing I think is exciting is eliminating some of the at least reducing some of the real issues in the fuel cycle and increasing the power efficiency, because when you do light water reactors, they're actually pretty damn inefficient in the sense of how much of what percentage of the available power and the raw materials you're using is actually converted to electricity, and we can certainly improve on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I think for me, that's one of the fundamental points is what power density actually means on a practical scale. It just means we don't have to dig up as much stuff at the end of the day. If you have a substance that, as rare as it is, you only need around a soda can sized chunk to provide your lifetime of energy. You're just not going to have as much waste at the end of the day.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Pretty incredible. I'm just kind of checking for some questions real quickly. Let's see. Okay. All right. I'm not seeing any right away. But I guess I'll just ask you. You've seen this conversation around nuclear's role in fighting climate change kind of evolve over the years. And do you have a sense of if we're making progress? Do you have some hope for the future? Just your observations on that, if you could.
I'm optimistic. I have seen a tendency for people who sort of oppose nuclear power to start to rethink this. And I think the most important things that we can do, this group that's on this call, for example, is to keep working on this, to keep trying to persuade people of the benefits of nuclear power, to prevent its complete dissolution in the West. From my vantage point, the nuclear power is really ramping up quickly in Russia, China, and South Korea. I visited South Korea last year on this issue. So there's also an interesting kind of economic point here that if the West doesn't do this, it's going to cede a very large portion of the $6 trillion annual energy market to the Far East. And that's not going to be good for us. I think this economic argument resonates with people, even if they're not entirely persuaded about the problems of climate change. So I'm optimistic. I think we can do it technically, we can do it financially. It's persuading lots of people that this is the right way to do things, not necessarily to the exclusion of renewables and others, but as has been said here quite frequently in other places, right at the moment, it doesn't look like we can do all that much of it with renewables, and we simply have to have a green base load. This is the way to go.
Yeah, I'm hearing some support for molten salt reactors, some bullishness on molten salt reactors in the comments here. Do you have a favorite Gen 4 design, or are you bullish on MSRs?
Yes, I am. I think there's all kinds of innovation going. I don't know if people here are familiar with the concept of a nuclear battery, but that's a very interesting concept. Is that, Eric, do you know if people are familiar with that?
Yeah, well, I guess there's been some additional press about it lately, but I'm always wondering: is it actually fission, or is it is it an RTG? Is it a decay of plutonium-238?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know that, but I talked to the nuclear engineers at MIT quite a bit. They're very upbeat about the future of fission. And also, for the first time since I've been there for about 40 years, they're very upbeat about fusion on about a 15-year time scale. There have been some very interesting technical breakthroughs in that, and so I'm much more upbeat about that. I don't think we can afford to wait 15 years or to pin our hopes on that, but it's a bright light down at the end of the tunnel. In the meantime, we really have to ramp up Generation 4. And I agree with you that molten salt reactors are very interesting designs.
Yeah. You look back in history and kind of wonder, what if Alvin Weinberg and company were allowed to continue pursuing with the molten salt reactor experiment, and where might we be today if we didn't get scared in the late 70s? It might be a different world.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thought experiment.
Right. Well, thanks again for joining us. I really appreciate it. And sorry about the bandwidth there. I think I managed to pull up a photo of you mid talk, so we could kind of on the phone with. It's lots of fun. Well, thanks for all the work you're doing, and thanks for spreading awareness of the scale of the challenge. I hope that those that think Indian Point is unnecessary will take heed and realize that we do really need it all at this point. We don't have the luxury. It's not 1960 or 70 or something when we're first hearing about a climate change, and we maybe could have done more. It's 2020. We're at 415 parts per million, and we're going to need more energy than ever if we hope to kind of geoengineer our own planet.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. All right. Well, take care.